It is your Thursday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day. Hope everybody's having a great day out there. Happy Game 5 of the Western Conference Finals. To those who celebrate, Game 5 tonight at Target Center. I got an email earlier today saying limited quantities of tickets still available for that game. And I suppose, right, like maybe people waiting to see if there was going to be a Game 5, especially after the first two games did not go the Wolves' way. First three, as it turned out, but they forced that Game 5 with a 105-100 win on Tuesday in Dallas. Now have the opportunity to extend the series again tonight at Target Center. Chris Hine and I will talk a lot about that in a little bit here. He, of course, covers the Timberwolves for the Star Tribune. We'll break down kind of what was different about Game 4 that allowed the Wolves to win that game. All these games have been close. What does that mean for the rest of the series? Could the Wolves use maybe a larger margin in this game so they don't have to be sweating it, knowing that Dallas has such good closing time players with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving? All of that, Chris and I will get into that here in just a little bit, and I will have you covered tonight, planning to do a post-game podcast as well as a bonus episode, win or lose. And again, it's elimination game, win or go home. Got some Vikings thought at the end of the show, a Gophers basketball thought at the end of the show quickly. First, though, what did I miss? I need to ask this big question. Is the curse of Minnesota sports, if you believed in such a thing, I don't know if you do. I don't know if you believe in curses or if that's just a proxy for, hey, I don't like the way things have gone, things like that. You want to blame it on some, greater force or larger entity. But if you believe in curses, is it lifting in Minnesota sports? And I ask that on a number of fronts. Maybe we start with the Twins finally winning a playoff game and then a playoff series last year. I know it didn't end how they wanted it to when they lost to Houston in the second round, but winning a playoff game against Toronto, winning that series against Toronto, first time in 19 years they'd won a playoff game, first time in 21 years they'd won a playoff series, ending the longest losing streak in North American pro sports history, 18 games. If that was a curse, you can make a case for it. That's a pretty long time to wait between playoff victories for a team, especially a team that was pretty good in a lot of those years. That is a long time to wait. So if you believe in curses, that is a reason to believe in curses. But if you do, is that the beginning then of whatever this is in Minnesota sports starting to be lifted? I think the Timberwolves in this year's playoffs are a good example, too, of, hey, things are different. Maybe that's a better way to frame it. Things are different. It feels different. It doesn't feel like gloom and doom or that you're expecting the worst to happen anymore when a Minnesota team gets to the playoffs. And I think a lot of that has to do with the stars, the young stars on both the teams I just mentioned. Royce Lewis for the Twins, who absolutely carried them in those playoff games last year, and Anthony Edwards, who is kind of the emotional and on-court leader of this team. As he goes, so do they. Now, I know this, they might lose tonight, like I talked about, and then this whole run is over, but this run is more than I thought they were going to do this year. As good as the regular season was, as much as they were flirting all year with being the 1 seed until right at the end when they were the 3 seed, they won 56 games. Second best year in franchise history. They were a really good team this year, but going into the playoffs, you just kind of look at the path and you're like, Phoenix, tough matchup, right? Like I thought they might lose that first round. I thought there was a better than 50-50 chance they're going to lose that first round after going 0-3 against Phoenix. And they sweep Phoenix. They play Denver, and they have to win a Game 7 on Denver's home court. They're down 20 in that game, in case you've forgotten, and win that game in Denver. That is not something that we are accustomed to seeing from a Minnesota team. And yeah, I know the Dallas series isn't going the way they want. They lost some close games. Luka broke their hearts in Game 2 with that three-pointer with 3 seconds left, and they couldn't match it when Naz Reid's 3 at the buzzer went in and out. that hurts. But that's sports. That's playoff basketball. It's not a curse. The curse is, getting swept in the first round after being a great team, things like that. That's fodder for being a curse, or losing 4 straight in the first round on unimaginable baskets, things like that. Then you could talk me into it. They're in the Western Conference Finals. They're not cursed right now. They are maybe the opposite of that. But the strongest indicator that we have right now is PWHL Minnesota. Let's just wind back a few weeks when they were having all kinds of struggles. They were a good team in the regular season. Looked like they might be the number 1 seed in this new league, the PWHL 6-team league. Great, great support, great players on every team. Looked like they might, they were cruising. They were really good. Then they lost their last 5 regular season games, and they needed help just to get in the playoffs. All they needed was like 1 point for the longest time to clinch a playoff spot. Couldn't get it. And then, a team loses on the last game of the regular season. They get into the playoffs. They get shut out twice to start the playoffs against number 1 seed Toronto. You're like, okay, nice start to the year, bad finish. They're going to be out, and that's just that. And they storm back and win 3 straight playoff games against Toronto, number 1 seed. They come back, win those 3 games, get into the championship series, the Walter Cup, win 2 of the first 3 against Boston. They're on the cusp of winning the trophy. They're at home at XL Energy Center. They think they have scored the championship-winning goal the other night in Game 4. They all go streaming onto the ice. The puck's in the net. And then, review time, goalie interference. Good call, by the way. Not a bad call. A good call. Justified call. Everything about the call was fine. But the emotional hangover from thinking you have won, and then Boston scores like a minute later, sends it to a Game 5 back in Boston. Like, how do you emotionally regroup from that, especially if you were part of this Minnesota sports curse? Well, maybe you're not anymore, because Minnesota played maybe the best 20 minutes that I could imagine them playing last night to win this game 3-0, to win the Walter Cup. They played a great 60 minutes, obviously, but they were up 1-0 after 2. Then I really started to lock in on the game, and they started to lock in on what they were doing. They played a fantastic final 20 minutes. Nothing was in their end, and when it was getting out quickly. They put pressure on Boston without being careless, without being, too risky. They swarmed Boston about midway through the third period. Got that second goal that they needed to feel a little bit of that breathing room, where they weren't just one bounce away from a tie game, and then just locked it down the rest of the way. Got an empty net goal with a couple minutes left. 3-0 final in that game. Just a start to finish impeccable performance, but especially the third period. So is that what a cursed team does? Is that what a cursed state of Minnesota sports does? No. So if you believed before in curses, and I get it, there was ample evidence to support, the idea that, hey, something's not right here. Things are not going great. Yeah, I know the Vikings are a strong contender for believing in some of these things. I get all that. But if you believed in curses before, think about what's happened recently and leave space in your hearts and minds for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, the curse is being lifted. Let us talk Timberwolves today with Chris Hine. It's one of the biggest stories in town, although I guess you could argue there's plenty going on right now with some of the other teams. But yeah, this is what everyone's kind of locked in on, Chris. And I wasn't sure they were going to get this back to Minneapolis for another game after they lost the first 2 and then lost the first 3 of the Western Conference Finals. But some perseverance and some shot making from Karl Anthony Towns in particular, just when they needed it most, keeps them alive in Game 4. And now here we are with, they got to be feeling, hey, win Game 5 and then you never know, right?
Yeah, I hear that. I just want to see them do what they did down the stretch of Game 4 again in Game 5, because that's what it's going to take most likely.
Yeah.
And you wonder if that's repeatable, or if more of games 1 through 3 is the norm and Game 4 is the aberration. So, nice win to get that in their building like that. And, it's always difficult to win on the road in the postseason. So, if you're going to make history here, you got one of the hardest ones out of the way to do it. But, I just, the playoffs is about consistency, and Dallas has shown an ability to bottle up Ant and Cat on a regular
Right.
basis 3 out of the 4 games so far. So, unless the Wolves have unlocked something, unless the Derek Lively injury means that much
Right.
to the complexion of this series, I still think the Wolves have a lot to prove tomorrow night to show that they're truly the better team as they think they are.
Yeah. Well, what did you make of game four then? Because obviously some things changed. They were able to hold down Luka and Kyrie to a certain degree. Luka was just 7 of 21. Kyrie Irving struggled to shoot. And obviously, Ant made a lot of plays. He wasn't terribly efficient. He still took 25 shots, but he almost had a triple double. Like he was more himself. And then obviously, Karl Anthony Towns gets himself going 20 points in the second half before he fouled out. Do you say that's more on the Wolves, more on Dallas? How do you kind of frame how that game transpired?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of both. I think, maybe Dallas, up 3-0 in a series is a little natural letdown. And Luka and Kyrie obviously weren't as sharp as they have been in this series. And some of the other supporting players, I think PJ Washington struggled to shoot last night as
Yeah.
well. It was kind of one of those nights. And for the Wolves, it felt like a law of averages game where it was like Towns and Ant were so bad shooting wise for the first couple of games of the series that they were due for a good night. So that's why I say I want to see it again and not just have this be the one off of the
Right.
series, which that's kind of what I felt like leaving the arena last night is like it felt like a classic game four where it's like I think overall Dallas I don't think the paradigm of the series shifted or the Wolves figured anything out that's going to overwhelmingly shift this series. The only thing that you could maybe hang your hat on is, Edwards and Towns got going a little bit because maybe in part because Lively wasn't on the
Yeah.
floor. So as long as he's out, maybe the Wolves have a better chance than to come back in the series than if he was in.
The Wolves have been awfully good at kind of living in the moment, not living with regret. The series really should be 2-2. It feels like a 2-2 series right now. And the game that they've got to that's still got to be haunting them is game two, right? Where
Right.
they're up five with about 90 seconds left. They've got multiple opportunities. Ant has a couple turnovers. You got the call on with Jaden, which is technically the correct call, but if they call a foul there, probably a different game. Luka hits the dagger three, and then there you go, you're down 2-0. So that obviously changed the entire complexion of the series. But if you think about it that way, it's like this series is really close, but it's 3-1 still, and it's kind of hard to kind of reconcile. I don't know if that works in the Wolves' favor or Dallas's favor when you kind of try to talk yourself into what's going to happen in game five or game six going forward.
Yeah, I don't know what that means overall. Um, I just think the late game offense is a big part of
Yeah.
that, and I don't think it's accidental that Dallas has done much better than the Wolves at that part of the game
Yeah.
than throughout most of the series. I think that's definitely part of a team's DNA and not accidental. So on the one hand, yes, they're close games, but that's Dallas. I think pushing a decided advantage in those moments. The Wolves, I think generally have to get up big. Last night they did, and then they were able to gut out a win. And the Wolves have shown that they can get up big on Dallas. What were they up 18 in game
Yeah.
two in the first
Right.
half?
Well,
They closed the first half poorly. Dallas had a 6-0 run to make it 12 at the half instead of the
yeah.
Wolves pushing it past 20. I thought that was another key moment of that game. It gave Dallas some life going into the third quarter when the Wolves looked like they had them on the ropes. So, that being said, if the Wolves can come out and play game five like they did game six against Denver the first half of game two and get a double digit lead. They're I don't know what Dallas's largest lead of the series has been. It,
Yeah.
it hasn't maybe 10. or
Right.
11 in game, maybe in game three at some point they led by double digits, but it hasn't been a lot. I think the Wolves have had the lead, especially in those first two games longer, and
Yes.
they had larger leads too. So, it is a close series. The Wolves just have to do their damage earlier in the games, because if the next three games all come down to late game
Yeah.
situations, that Dallas is going to win one of those
You would
games.
think.
You would think. So the Wolves have to find a way to run them off the floor in some of these games coming up here if they're going to have a chance of winning.
I think that's fair to say. And I also think
Mm-hmm.
like you said, like late game offense, it's been an issue for them at various points in the season. Sometimes it seems that they figure it out. Other times they don't. And obviously Dallas got them in those first three games. It was obviously better in game four. I think it was 95-90 with 5 minutes left. It's 10-10 for the rest of the way. So you'll take that if you're the Wolves, especially if you start up five. Did they learn anything, find anything different in those 5 minutes? Was it execution? Was it simple shot making? Was it just the Dallas missed shots? Like why was game four different
Oh,
or at least better for them in that regard?
no, the early part of that was Carl was just hitting shots.
Yeah.
He hit threes on consecutive possessions. They were actually down one. It was 90-89
Yep.
with about 5.5 minutes or so left when Carl hit a three to put them up two. And then after a stop, he hit another three to put them up
Yep.
95-90. That to me was the key moment of the game,
For
was
sure.
those two Carl threes, because it looked like Dallas was making its push to take over in late game, but Carl comes up with two big threes there. So I don't know if they learned anything. I think what we learned is, if Anthony Edwards and Carl Anthony Towns just play well, or
Yeah.
don't play as poorly as they do in the first three games, the Wolves have a chance of winning,
Right.
a better chance of winning.
Right.
They were trying to win the first three games with one hand tied behind their back, because their best offensive weapons were struggling. And credit to guys like Mike Conley and Naz Reid, who had the big game too, and
Yep.
Jaden McDaniels has had a pretty good offensive series.
Yep.
Those guys have kept them in it throughout the series. But it's the Western Conference Finals. If you're, if one player who's on a max contract and another who's going to enter a max contract can't perform up to the expectations of it, it's, you're not going to win when you're one of the final four teams left.
No, that's a good point.
And I do, and I
Um,
do. By the way, I do think their defense was better last night,
I
and,
thought so
and
too.
it's just not just all about offense too.
Yep.
They forced some turnovers. I remember
Yep.
Kyrie had a bad pass at
Yep.
one point. They were doubling, they were rotating, I think, at a higher level late in game four than they were in some of the other games, for sure.
I think that's true. And I also think, both of those Towns threes you referenced, they were orchestrated to a degree by Kyle Anderson. I think he set the screens on both of those, and there was a clip circulating on Twitter that kind of showed the replay of, Anderson kind of directing traffic, like, "Hey, Ant, go here. I'm going to set this screen." It's almost like he's calling a play in the huddle. It's like, "You go here, Cat, you go over there. This is what's going to happen." Cat makes that three that makes it 95-90.
Mm-hmm.
He's been really good in this series. I don't know if it's just the way he kind of can control pace, the way he gives them extra kind of ball handling help, especially if Conley's not on the floor, whether it's how he can kind of switch and guard multiple positions. But he feels like he's become a pretty important player in this series, whereas maybe in other moments in this season and past playoff series, he wasn't as important.
Yeah, and you see what he adds to the floor. That clip is a great example of it. Just the kind of the cerebral aspect of his game, the playmaking part of his game. This series, I think, is a little more of a Kyle Anderson series, in part because Dallas is a little bigger than some of the teams the
Yep.
Wolves have faced, and I think that helps him, and allows him to stay on the floor and match up a little better with some of these teams front, or with Dallas's front line, as opposed to other the first two series. So I think a little bit of this is matchup based. He's refound his scoring touch, and that's been good for the Wolves to see. And it's always been kind of up and down for Kyle Anderson this year, because they've had him playing the three a lot of
Yeah.
the time.
Right.
Um, but in this series, he's navigated that well, I thought, and he's an extra body that they could throw at Luka Doncic because he's got the size, and Luka is not the quickest, fastest guy in the world, and
Right.
Anderson can keep up with him a little bit, so it's helpful that he can at least spell McDaniel and or Ant for minutes at a time when it comes to guarding Luka. So yeah, just his impact on the series has been huge, and you know I think what was it, game one? I think that he had a big scoring night, and
Yep.
it's it's been heartening to see. You wonder off season moves coming up and
Yeah.
the
He's a free
luxury
agent.
tax
Yeah.
and all that. Yeah, if there was one player who that's on this roster that's in this rotation right now that I think it's going to be very hard for them to keep next year, it's going to be Kyle Anderson.
Yep.
So I this might be his last hurrah as a Minnesota Timberwolf, and he's making the most of it if that is going to be the case.
It's fashionable, probably at this point, to say, hey, Wolves probably have a good shot at winning game five. They're back home. They're favored. You got some momentum from winning game five, but then you go back to Dallas for game six. Dallas is going to throw everything at them. That's a much tougher game and maybe a more likely loss. So kind of mapping this out, Mavs in six. Do you think that's the most likely outcome at this point?
The most likely outcome, which means it's not going to happen because because nothing in this postseason for the Timberwolves that's the likely outcome has happened. So I would fully expect this series not to end with Game 6 in Dallas, and which means it would either end tomorrow night or in Game 7.
Wow.
So who knows? But yes, the logic. You can kind of make the logical. Oh yeah, the Wolves are back home. Little extra
Mm-hmm.
juice. They'll win Game
Mm-hmm.
5, and yeah, Dallas closes it out in their home building in Game 6. But I don't. This team has been too unpredictable in this postseason to go according to anybody's script.
Well, and that kind of goes back to something you and I talked about, I think last time you were on the podcast last week, where it's like the Wolves, for whatever reason, this playoffs have seemed to thrive more when there there's something to overcome, where there's kind of something they have to persevere through. Like, hey, Phoenix,
Yeah,
oh man, tough series. You're not going to beat Phoenix, and they sweep them. Denver. Boy, you got to play the defending champs on their home court. You rout them. Like, oh man, okay, everyone's feeling great about the Wolves, and then they lose three in a row. So it's like as soon as you start to feel good about them, they slip, and as soon as you start to get down on them, they get back up. What do you think that is, or what do you and how does that maybe factor in? I mean, they're 3-0 in elimination games so far. How does that factor in when they could be eliminated, I should say?
yeah. I don't know. I guess there's a little extra energy on the part of some of the younger players, or Anthony Edwards, or whatever. I can't really explain it. I don't know. That's and throughout the season, they did a good job of kind of not letting that stuff seep in.
Right,
They did better against teams they should
right.
have beaten this year, which is one of the reasons why they were in contention for the one seed all the way
Yep,
through. They never let a losing streak get to three, which
yep.
was, I thought, a very impressive accomplishment. So I don't know. I can't really put my finger on it. I just wonder. We've heard a lot about Chris Finch, and the players have talked about the distractions of being at home.
Yeah.
Whether it be a bunch of players with newborns, or just the added attention in their lives from
Hmm.
family and friends, people asking for tickets or whatever, whatever the situation may be. So I just wonder if they're just not in the right headspace for
Yeah.
some of these home games the way they can be on the road, which is why they've been so successful on the road and not at home this year. And for future years, you hope that's an important lesson for them to learn, and maybe they've learned it um, ahead of Game 5. I think it's notable that the Wolves did not come home last night after the
Hmm.
game.
Okay.
They decided to stay in Dallas, stay overnight there, and then fly back today, which kind
Yep.
of almost makes Game 5 almost like a road scenario, almost,
Okay.
where it's like
Yeah.
you're flying back, maybe you're getting a workout in, you're just getting dinner, you're going home, and you're probably going to sleep, early,
And then you got a game
and
the
then
next day. Yeah.
you got a game the next day, you got shoot
Yeah.
around, you got your
Yeah.
game day routine. So
Interesting.
it almost feels like game five is a away game, but at home in some ways.
Okay.
I feel like maybe they're trying to replicate
Hmm.
that sort of routine by flying back today instead of after the game, which was an option.
Did Ant tell any locker room attendants in Dallas that he'll be back again?
I think he told Micah Parsons that he was going to
That's
bring
right.
him back a pair of shoes for
That's
Game
right. He
Six.
did
So
say that,
there you
didn't
go.
he?
That's what he did. Yeah,
That's the new locker room attendant.
that's the
Okay.
new locker room attendant. Yep, yep.
Nice. Well, speaking of Ant, maybe final thing here, not that you're not busy enough, but I saw you noted, and we talked about this offline. You're writing a book about
I
Anthony
am.
Edwards. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's all very new and it's happened very quickly. But yeah, this is super exciting. So no off season for me, no matter what
No,
happens here. We'll be going right into book mode once the season's over here. Um, but yeah, this has been a dream come true, and to write a book, and it's opportunity presented itself, and happy to be working with HarperCollins, the publishing company, and yeah, we're going to be aiming for a release date of next May. So hopefully, about a little under a year from now, you'll hopefully have a book in your hands about Anthony Edwards.
try to time it for next year's
Next postseason.
playoffs,
Yep.
hopefully. And again, that maybe that's a good way to kind of conclude this because everyone, you assume, right, or like there's this narrative, right? Like, hey, they made it this far, got a good core. A lot of these guys signed. Yeah, they've got some salary decisions to make in the offseason, but if they can figure out a way to keep a lot of these players around, you could imagine them being in position to make playoff runs for the next, 2, 3, 4 years. That said, like, a guy like Mike Conley's got to know, Rudy Gobert's got to know, like, you never know when you're going to get to a conference finals again. Like, you don't know. Like, they could have been out in the semifinals this year very easily to Denver. They could have, say they get matched up in say they would have fallen to the 4 seed and they get it matched up with Dallas right there. They could have got bounced right away in the playoffs. Like, you just don't know what's going to happen in the playoffs. Taking looking too far into the future, like, oh man, well they'll be back. They'll have another chance. Grant. That's not a given.
Nope, absolutely not. Nothing is a given. Even if you are set up for, you think, long-term sustained success because you have Anthony Edwards as a 22-year-old,
Right.
perennial all-star caliber player. It's just not guaranteed that you're going to have the roster around him
Yeah.
every year to make a deep run like this. So yeah, you got to seize this moment, seize these opportunities, and no team has ever come back from 3-0. And obviously, it's highly doubtful that that's going to happen. But this team has been crazy enough this postseason and
Yeah.
defied expectations, both good and bad,
Right.
at every turn. So who the hell knows what's going to happen? And I think this has happened. Like, Boston obviously did this last year
Yeah. They got it back
against
to a game
Miami.
7.
They got
Yeah.
it back to a game 7, and it was kind of the same scenario. They had to win, game 4 on the road, and
Yeah.
game 6 on the road, and they lost game 7 at home. But this I don't know why it might be easier, or why it almost happened last year, and you know in years past it hasn't even come close to happening. But who knows? But that being said, I think the Wolves, you got to get a blowout in here
Yeah.
somewhere, and
That's a good point.
I think you got to try and come out and rout Dallas tomorrow night.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think some of it too is just like, a lot of times when someone takes a 3-0 lead, it's like it's a 1 versus an 8 or a 2 versus a 7. Like they're just clearly a better team and the other team's not going to come back. Like that's not what this series is. Like, yeah, you could say these teams are pretty equal, but the Wolves are still a higher seed. Like that was the case with Boston and Miami last year. Like it's probably
Yeah,
unusual for a lower seed to take the 3-0 lead, and it's probably at least, if you look at it that way, frame it that way, the possibility for a comeback is maybe more great than just like your typical 3-0 comeback. So we'll see.
yeah, yep. I think that's accurate. I just, you say one team is usually the better team in these scenarios, and Dallas is the better team at clutch situations.
Yes.
So you just got to avoid that as much as possible, I think.
Yep, 100%. We'll see what happens at Target Center Thursday night. Chris Hine will have you covered. Chris, appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Great stuff from Chris, as usual. He has been extremely busy, back and forth to all these places. We'll see if the Wolves send him back to Dallas again. Again, Game 5 is tonight, of course. I thought Chris made a really good point. It's going to be hard for the Wolves to win 3 more games that are really close. First of all, it's never been done in history that a team has come back from a 3-0 deficit. It is now 155 and now that Indiana has not done it either. They got swept by Boston in their series after falling behind 3-0. 155-0. The Wolves already got 1. To win the next 3, I think Chris is right. You can't rely on close games in all of them because Dallas has such good closing time players. Even if you've been, right there neck and neck in all 4 games of these series, and that lets you feel good about your chances of being right there, you don't want to take this down to the end again, game after game after game. So if you're going to get a comfortable win, I'm not talking about like a 45-point blowout like they had against Denver in Game 6 of that series. I'm talking about a comfortable win, one where you're not sweating it down to the final minutes, one by like 12 or 15, one where you just kind of like, you get a lead, maybe Dallas cuts it to like 8, you get a little tense, but then you make a couple buckets, and then all of a sudden it's like order has been restored. With about 2 minutes left, you know who's going to win. You're not having to grind it out to the very end. It's a comfortable win. It doesn't have to be a blowout win, but a comfortable win. Can they get one of those? Can that come tonight? Can it kind of ease a little bit of that pressure where they feel like they have to always, worry about what's happening next? Can you, take the element of Luka hitting a dagger with Kyrie doing Kyrie things at the very end of a game? If they could do that tonight, and beggars won't be choosers, they'll take a win any way they can get it tonight, because you gotta, it's win or go home, obviously. But if they can get that, I feel like that would have a bigger, like Chris was saying, carry-over effect to the rest of this series if they can get that kind of game tonight. Let us finish with the cooler. Couple things quick. Dalton Reisner, guard, back with the Vikings. Wasn't sure if he was coming back. Looked like Blake Brandel might be tabbed as the starting guard, but now looks like Blake Brandel will be more like a swing player, unless Reisner's just there for depth. But I can't imagine he is after he started 11 games last year after getting here, in the middle of the season. So just gives the Vikings more options. Maybe Brandel becomes kind of that swing player where he has a lot of responsibilities. If anybody's hurt, anybody's underperforming, he can play guard, he can play tackle, things like that. So maybe they like his versatility while Reisner is the starter. Whatever it is, you can never have too many quality, competent offensive linemen. You can certainly have too few. The Vikings have proven that in previous years. You cannot have too many. So a good, low-key, late May signing for the Vikings in bringing back Dalton Reisner. Always available in the locker room, by the way. Good for us. Good for the media, because he is a good talker, a good dude in the locker room, and always available to us. Another guard, different sport. Gophers men's basketball. Cam Christie, for sure gone. Testing the NBA. He was 99% out the door already, but Marcus Fuller reporting that it is certain now that he is testing the NBA draft. Tough for Ben Johnson. We've been through this before, and nothing's really new here. This is just kind of the finality of it, but tough for Ben Johnson. How do you replace all of the talent that went out the door from the end of last season when you thought you might have all these guys back, building on an NIT team, building on a much improved team? That will be his task next year, and he knows now for sure he will not have Cam Christie. That will do it for me today. Planning to do, like I said, a bonus episode tonight off of Timberwolves Game 5, and then a regular episode tomorrow, likely talking Minnesota United soccer with John Marthaler. Until then, I am Michael Rand, back at it again later.